I perfected the art of bilocation today. I was speaking at a conference in Maynooth this morning. And so before I begin, I'd like to thank Dr Brian Hughes, who was the coordinator of the conference on Southern Irish loyalism, and for allowing me to be the first speaker so I could be here with you today. And as I was driving up from Maynooth today, I was driving through South Donegal, and I couldn't help thinking what a beautiful day it is. And for 3 families, today is not a good day. And so with this plea in my heart, I would urge you this weekend or every day this summer, just take it easy. And we pray, I guess, for those families today. So 20 years ago this year, in fact, 20 years ago today, I was a very precocious 18-year-old. And it was a big deal for me to go to college. Nobody in my family had ever went to university. And I felt a certain obligation that I must learn as much as I can about Irish politics before I went to study politics at the University of Limerick. So I used to get a bus. I used to walk to the main road and then hitch a lift to the town and then get a bus to Dublin. And this detail defined the rest of my life, because the bus arrived in Dublin at 10:30 every day. And then I walked to the Dublin Castle and I went into the tribunal, the McCracken Tribunal. But because the tribunal had started already by the time I had arrived, all the seats at the tribunal were taken, except one. And it was the one that most people didn't want to sit in. It was the one beside Michael Lowry. So I used to go into the tribunal, this 18-year-old, 20 years ago, with my pink school bag. And in my pink school bag was my lunchbox, a bottle of Lucozade from our pub, and a hairbrush. Those details are exceptionally important. And I was a bit embarrassed when I would arrive in the hustle and bustle, and all the seats taken, and I'd sit beside Michael Lowry. And so I used to put my pink school bag behind a pillar as I went in to Dublin Castle. And it so happened that I did this, as I did every day, on one of the days that one of the loyalist terrorist organisations declared a bomb warning on the Republic. So the tribunal rose for the day, and I said to Mr. Lowry, we got to know one another at that stage. He used to keep a seat for me. People used to think I was his daughter. So I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Lowry. Oh, I'll see you tomorrow, Elaine. And I went out and I went to where the pillar was, and my school bag was gone. So I went to the guard. I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Guard. I was in the habit of calling people Mr. Lowry and Mr. Guard. Mr. Guard, did you happen to see my pink school bag? And he said, that was yours. And I was swiftly escorted into the bowels of Dublin Castle, into a very bare, raw room to an 18-year-old, where there was 2 chairs and a table, and I was left sit there for a couple of hours while they checked my story out, and they rang my parents. And finally I was released. And I sat there on my own in that room in Dublin Castle for hours, or what seemed like hours, wondering what was going on. And that was 20 years ago, as I said today. And later that year, in 1997 rather, you had the Flood Tribunal, which became known as the Man Tribunal, and you had the Moriarty Tribunal, which was established. And I put it to you, 2 decades on, we're all still bloody well wondering what's going on. And tribunals are a lot like bombs. They're a potentially explosive event, which produces shockwaves and chaparral capable of piercing political and societal attitudes towards the perceived way of doing things. But do they produce more heat than light? And what I'm going to do today, very quickly, is talk about, 1, do we have an addiction to tribunals in Ireland? 2, I'm going to give you very briefly some examples. And 3, based on my work with the European Commission for the last 5 years, where I was reporting in Irish governance for the European Commission, I'm going to go through very quickly some recommendations that are in their reports, following from my information to them. So I will begin by our apparent national addiction to public tribunals. And if I was to leave you today with just one figure, This is the only figure you need to know. The 10 million projected cost of the commission of investigation into IBRC and the sale of SiteServe is double the annual budget of the Office of Director of Corporate Enforcement. So this instinctive response that we have in Ireland to public concerns about allegations of wrongdoing is to create temporary judicial-led inquiries rather than invest, I would suggest, in a properly resourced oversight agency. It is not clear, and I'm sure my future colleagues may disagree with me on this point, but it's not clear why judges and barristers are constantly deemed more able than forensic auditors and accountants to adjudicate the propriety of complex financial transactions. So when wrongdoing happens in Ireland, what do we want? We want a tribunal. When do we want it? Now. So the government's response to the fallout of the sale of NAMA's Northern Ireland portfolio to the US investment company Cerebus was a commission of investigation. The response by the PSNI to concerns about Project Eagle was a police investigation. The response by the UK authorities, by the National Crime Agency, was a police investigation. The response by the US authorities was a joint FBI and Securities Exchange investigation. What was the response of the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau? I don't know, because I'm still waiting to hear what it is. So what we have in Ireland, I would suggest, is a word that I've used a couple of times, which is reportitis. This perhaps obsession in Ireland that we have about reports and tribunals. So I'll give you two very quick examples. Jared mentioned that we keep mentioning lists from the past. I'm going to give you two lists now from the future. From the future, from the present, and right now. So bear with me, because there's 17 things in this list. I'm going to start in 2013. 2013, the Garda Professional Standards Unit conducted a review into Maurice McCabe's allegations. And that same year, there's an internal review conducted by the Garda Assistant Commissioner. Then, the same year, there's a Controller and Auditor General publishes its report on penalty points that year. That's 3 reports into the same issue in 2013. We go mad in 2014 altogether, because we've got the Garda Inspectorate Review, we've got the John Cook Independent Inquiry, we've got the Fennelly Commission of Inquiry, we've got the Gearan Report, and we've got the another Garda Inspectorate Report, which is largely ignored, which is extraordinarily well detailed, and is a mystery to me why people were calling for a review of the Gardaí, because they obviously have not read these reports. And then in 2015, you've got the O'Higgins Commission of Inquiry, you've the CSO review, and then you've a follow-up to the CSO review, and then you've another Garda Inspectorate publication which no one reads. In 2016, things calmed down a bit. We just have the Murray review into legislation, and then in the last year, we had the O'Neill Inquiry and Charlton Inquiry. And then we had 2 external root and branch reviews into the Gardaí. And the extent of the amount of reports that we have is acknowledged in the Public Accounts Committee this week, where on page 25 they have a list of all the ongoing investigations into the same thing. And I would, while we're on the Public Accounts Committee, it is an indictment on the Public Accounts Committee that their report was not taken seriously, because the only thing we're talking about right now is whether or not the Garda Commissioner should go on holidays, and absolutely nothing that's in the Public Accounts Committee at all. Because people aren't listening anymore, because what we have is a report into a report into a report into a report. And I'm going to give you a very ugly example of that now. Grace. When Grace was found, she had a teddy bear that she wouldn't let go. And she can't speak, she's never been able to speak. And do not let into your head why that teddy bear meant so much to her and what will happen to her for 11 years, because you will not be able to sleep at night. This was the response to what happened, Grace. the Divine Report in 2012, the Resilience Report in 2015, the Conor Dynam Report in 2016, which was a report into the previous two reports. Then there was the Commission of Inquiry. None of these include the inquiries and examinations conducted by the Department of Health, the Department of Children, the Ombudsman, the HSE, the Gardaí, Tulsa, and the Public Accounts Committee. And so I've just given you a list. I'm going to give you another list. Those lists I've given you are from 2012. Here's a list from 1995. When Grace's difficulties were first probed by the state, when they were first seen as something that intervention should be made, the social workers started to conduct body maps of Grace about her injuries because they felt nobody was listening. These are the lists that they did from 1995. Broken skin on the base of back, red marks on the spine, scratches on her back, similar to carpet burn, bruising on her thigh and breast, 7 teeth removed because of neglect, removal of underwear and adoption of a sexual position on the utterance of a particular phrase. And I've written quite a lot about this, and I don't want to talk too much about what went on with Grace, but that was an example, just like McCabe, of our response to something wrong, which is to have a report. And by God, we'll have a report into a report. And when we've done that, we'll have another report. And maybe we'll have an inquiry and a commission of inquiry then. So what should we do? The first suggestion that I have, that I've given to the European Commission, but also one that I've presented to different Oireachtas committees. And I understand that this works in particular contexts and not in other contexts, and it is more in the sense of the Office of Director of Corporate Enforcement and more in the sense of the IBRC inquiry. Ireland is trying to be very good at protecting whistleblowers. But what we don't do is incentivise whistleblowers. And in America, there is very much a focus on incentivising whistleblowers, not just protecting them. And I'm going to tell you very quickly what I mean by that. So in the US, if you give information which leads to an economic fine, you will receive a percentage of that fine. So in other words, you get a percentage of the overall settlement which is made as a consequence of the information that you have given to the authorities. So the financial incentives for whistleblowers who provide insider information can act as an additional tool in the enforcement arsenal for oversight agencies. The resources, time and specialist expertise required by oversight agencies to ensure enforcement on complex financial matters is expensive. So I would argue that inside whistleblowers can alleviate that. Would that work in Ireland? It already is, because under American law, Irish citizens working in the US or Irish citizens working in Irish multinationals in Ireland can receive monetary rewards for reporting fraud offences in their workplace under the US Foreign Bribery Corruption Act 1977. And in the 5-year period between 2001 and 2016, 65 Irish citizens have given information to American authorities seeking a reward for insider information which could potentially lead to fraud and or potentially to fines for fraudulent activities. And obviously the word has got out among Irish people because initially only 2 or 3 were reporting, and then last year, 2 years ago it was 10, and then last year it's 30. So I would argue that Ireland should implement a similar initiative that would facilitate whistleblowers to come forward and enables those economic fines, instead of going to the American exchequer, to go to the US or to go to the Irish exchequer. And there are other recommendations that I have. I'm conscious I don't wish to trespass on Eddie's time. One would be to introduce transparency clauses into public sector contracts. Another would be to have an independent audit of the capacity of oversight agencies, and there currently is a debate within government, and you might have heard a little bit of it during the Fine Gael leadership contest, where Simon Coveney is arguing for an anti-corruption commission, and then there is another wing within Fine Gael that are arguing for a more beefed up white-collar crime unit. But the fact that these things are now being discussed is quite promising. But I would suggest that in my experience of having spoken to many different oversight agencies across the sectors in the last 5 years, they are very committed public servants who are quite frustrated with the limitations that they have in their job. And I think that before announcements are given about new bodies or new legislation, that maybe, you know, an original thing, I'm being sarcastic there, an original thing to do would be actually to talk to the people on the front line of those agencies. I'm talking about the particular Gardaí. I know there's a report now at the Office Director Court Enforcement and people like that. And finally, there's also been a lot of frustration among the agencies about resources. Now, resources doesn't always mean extra money. It's not about the quantity of money, but the quality of people that you get into the agencies. And so resources don't simply mean a translation into staff numbers. So you can see, for example, in the Garda Inspector Report 2015, they raised the point that the Garda Bureau of Fraud Investigations struggled to manage the volume of suspicious financial transaction reports forwarded to them as part of the money laundering and terrorist financial legislation. So that same Garda Inspector Report found that the Garda Fraud Unit is investigating serious fraud without having the skills to do it. So I don't think Ireland is the most corrupt country in the world. I don't think, I think that we're very innovative of what we do, and I think we can be even more innovative. But part of that innovation requires us maybe to think a little bit outside of the box, and instead of always going into our pocket for the tool that we are so used to at this stage, this tool of tribunal, that satisfies an angry public appetite, and there is a place for that. And I wrote a book on it, so I'm not all against tribunals. I wouldn't have had the book if I was, but it's not the only solution. And I certainly don't want to be here in 20 years' time telling you about the day 40 years ago when I sat in a tribunal and caused a bomb alert, because I think we all are maybe a little bit tired of the bombs of tribunals without any long-term consequences of how we conduct our governance in different sectors of Irish society. So thank you very much.